It is a special LA Kings roundtable show with two special guests on this edition of Locked On LA Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, Kings fans, welcome to Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making Locked On LA Kings your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. We'd love you to leave us a positive comment on Apple Podcasts if you're a fan of the show. And we are on YouTube. Please like and subscribe if you're enjoying this content. I'm Eddie Garcia, your host of Locked On LA Kings. I've worked in sports media for the past 30 years, 20 plus years at the Fox Sports Radio Network, also host of the Puck Podcast. It's a weekly NHL review show that's been putting out content for the past 18 years, and a passionate LA Kings fan for over 30 years. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. The countdown to the NHL season continues. The Kings have 2 games in Quebec remaining in the preseason. Kings season opener is October 10th in Buffalo against the Sabres, just 8 days away. And the Kings home opener, a little farther away than that, October 24th against the San Jose Sharks, 22 days away. So obviously the season is going to be here very quickly. And we want to discuss what we've seen so far from the LA Kings in training camp and in the preseason. And we welcome in a couple of friends of the show. If you have been an everydayer, you have heard or seen these guys as guests before, but not together. So we will welcome in a couple of friends, including Austin Stanovich of the Hockey News. You can follow him on Twitter at ASStanovich68. And we also bring in Karo Blikian from the Bannerman podcast and also a Hockey News contributor as well. You can follow him at KGBlix, B-L-I-X, or KGB Licks. I don't know. Anyway, Russell Morgan from Hockey Royalty was going to join us, but had to drop out at the last second. So hopefully we'll have Russell on probably next week, because I'm sure he feels very guilty about not being able to join us. But Austin, Karo, thank you guys so much for taking the time to do this. Let's get right into it. And I want to get your thoughts on what we've seen and maybe learned so far this preseason, as Jim Hiller is now obviously leading this team, getting to put his stamp on this team, taking over last year for Todd McClellan during the season, but now his chance to have a full training camp and do the things he wants to do. So I'll start with you, Austin Stanovich. What have you seen so far from the LA Kings from a team standpoint that you think has been the biggest difference with the coaching change from a year ago?
Yeah, I mean, I think the obvious one is the system change. The much talked about 1-3-1 is gone. They switched the 1-2-2 system. The boring answer is there hasn't been a lot for me to take from this preseason personally. I mean, we've seen this roster's kind of been set for a while. There haven't been a ton of position battles. We aren't learning that much about many new guys. Tanner Jeannot's maybe the only big question mark. Obviously, Warren Fogel's another new name, but I mean, Kings fans have to be very familiar with Warren Fogel at this point after his time spent in Edmonton. So I don't think we've learned a ton this preseason. I think that this team wanted to get bigger. They wanted to get meaner. They wanted to change their style of play, and we're seeing the early signs of that. But it's going to be, how does that translate to the regular season? And unfortunately, at this time period, it's really how does it translate into the postseason that matters. So we're kind of in a weird spot with this Kings team where there's a lot of waiting still left to do, unfortunately.
Karo, Jim Hiller and Rob Blake talked about players being uncomfortable. I know there was a lot of talk about how this training camp has been more physical than any in recent times. From what you've heard, from what you've seen so far with the Kings, do you think that message has been translated so far into what we've seen from the Kings this preseason?
Yeah, small sample size, like Austin said, hard to say, but I think the biggest or the loudest sign was obviously the transactions that were made, the players that were brought in. Austin mentioned the 1-2-2, obviously that's the big one. But I was more curious to see if, with Hiller getting a clean slate, if the way the Kings attack in the zone would change. And honestly, in the preseason, it hasn't much. They're still going to work down low. They're still going to go low to high, get shots, and crash the net, hope to get loose change there. And the personnel they've brought in, I think, works for that better than the personnel they had last season. Austin mentioned Jeannot. couple of goals at the goal mouth. Alex Laferriere on the power play cleaning up some trash. So it looks like offensively speaking, and this is strictly set offense inside the blue line, not much is going to change, but the personnel I think is different enough where these players are willing to get uncomfortable, like you said, Eddie, and get the goals from the areas that weren't coming last season.
Karo, is there a player so far this preseason that has maybe opened your eyes a bit, or maybe somebody that you're looking at that you think could take a pretty significant step forward this season?
Well, I mean, Quentin Byfield looks pretty good. I think everyone agrees with that. I think the Byfield line with Fiala and Fogel, again, early returns, but they look pretty good. They look like they've been playing with each other for a long time. So Byfield, I think, is the obvious answer. Jeannot is another one. I liked that acquisition. I think if you want to nitpick about the cost of it, that's fine. Like, I'll listen to that a little bit, but I think he's been good. And I'm always going to be looking at Brant Clark. He's my type of player. Like, offense from the blue line. We just talked about getting shots through from the blue line and getting rebounds and scoring. I think that's the guy you're looking at. You know, having 3 quote unquote, well, 2 unfortunately now until December something, quote unquote offensive defenseman on the right side, I think is going to help the Kings in the offensive zone, because with respect, like going low to high to Matt Roy and then across to Gavrikov and getting a shot, I prefer hearing Clark, Doughty, and Spence getting those shots.
Austin, any player that you've enjoyed watching so far? Again, I know it's a small sample size, but anybody you've seen or anybody you think is going to take or should take a step forward this season from what we saw a year ago?
Yeah, I definitely agree with Karo on Quentin Byfield. That kid is such a stud. He's going to be so good up the middle for the Kings. He could potentially be a real game changer for this organization. So I'll echo those thoughts. The guy that's really stood up to me has been Alex Turcotte, though. Another guy, I've always really liked his game, and I think we're seeing very early signs that it's going to translate really well into the NHL. I've said a few times now, and I still think if he spends the whole season as a 4C, it's a complete waste of his talent. I think that he should be he and the Kings should be aiming higher for him. Like, I think this guy could step into the top 9 pretty comfortably right now based on what I've seen, certainly throughout his career and early in preseason. Just the combination of his motor, his skill, his hockey IQ, like all of it screams top 9 forward to me. And that's the guy who I've really, really been impressed with so far in the preseason.
And I think a lot of Kings fans are obviously happy that he's just finally getting this opportunity to show what he can do, and hopefully that will continue as we go into the regular season. Real quick, again, I know we haven't seen a lot of him. I don't know what your thoughts were going into this season, but in net, Darcy Kemper, coming back to the LA Kings, obviously he's had an interesting time in his time away from LA, the highs of winning a Stanley Cup and the lows of losing his starting job last year in Washington. Looked pretty good against the Ducks, albeit against a very young Ducks team. But you're going into it. You have reasonable expectations about Darcy Kemper kind of bouncing back from the season he had a year ago. Austin, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the benefit of, talk a lot about the 1-3-3. Even with this switch to the 1-2-2, Andre Kopitar said it, Jim Hiller said it, this is going to be a defense-first hockey team still, and I think that benefits Darcy Kemper maybe more than anyone. I think that's how you see the kind of bounce-back season you saw from Cam Talbot last year. I wouldn't put that kind of expectation on anyone to go out and make the All-Star game in a bounce-back season like Cam Talbot did last year, but at the very least, I think Darcy Kemper will be better in LA than he was in Washington last season, and frankly, the Kings really need him to. I mean, if he can't have that kind of bounce-back season, they could be in a lot of trouble. So, cautiously optimistic. He's not going to be a superstar, but I think he'll be a solid NHL goalie for him.
And Karo, we're obviously still waiting for the heir apparent to Jonathan Quick. Maybe it's Eric Bertillo, maybe it's Carter George down the line. But you think Kemper's got enough left in the tank for at least this season to be able to hold the fort down and do what he needs to do?
I do, and the latest article I wrote for the Hockey News is about Kemper, and some of the stats I pulled, just Washington defensively last season were some of the worst metrics you're going to find in terms of high danger chances, shots against, goals against, all that stuff. Now, credit to Charlie Lindgren. He obviously outperformed that defense, and he really put up ungodly numbers for the amount of rubber he was seeing from the areas he was seeing. The thing, Darcy Kemper is not going to need to be spectacular in this system, like Austin mentioned. The Kings are going to insulate their goaltending like they always have. And you mentioned the Anaheim game. It's a small sample size, but man, the Ducks, those weren't just your regular chances. They were breakaways. He had to go post to post, lunging a couple of times. Like, he looked pretty sharp and pretty focused. That'll probably happen for a player that gets a fresh start like that. But his body of work, I think, it's as good or if not better than Cam Talbot's. He's 2 years younger than Cam Talbot when he arrived in LA. I think all signs point to a smooth sailing season for Darcy Kemper. Hopefully he's healthy. That's the most important thing. But I suspect he'll do very well in LA.
All right. Well, we haven't brought it up yet. It was alluded to, but up next, we're going to talk about what should the Kings do in the wake of the Drew Doughty injury. That's next here on Locked On LA Kings, your team every day. Hey, those of us that live in the LA area, obviously very lucky. We have so many opportunities to check out live sporting events, sports for sure. I was at the Chargers-Chiefs game this past Sunday, but it's not just about sports. We've got theater events, comedy events, concerts, but no matter what you're into, you should do what I do and use Gametime for all your ticket needs. Gametime has a new feature called Gametime Picks. It makes getting tickets to your favorite live events even easier. Gametime Picks filters out the fluff to show you only the incredible deals on seats so that you don't have to waste your time searching through thousands of tickets. You can get Dodger playoff tickets for just over $100 with a Gametime discount. It could be less than $100. Just download Gametime, get the app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNHL, and get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime. All right, we continue with Austin Stanovich of the Hockey News and Karo Blikian of the Bannerman podcast on this special Kings Roundtable show. Obviously, the big story so far this preseason was the injury to the Kings' top defenseman, veteran Drew Doughty. Going to have surgery for the fractured ankle, reportedly going to be out 10 to 14 weeks. I don't know if this is a hot take at all. I don't think it is. But I would love to see the Kings move Brandt Clarke to the top pairing. He's not ready for it, but I think he's got the talent for it. I think he's got the mentality to take on that challenge. And frankly, who is ready for that role? Kyle Burrows, Jordan Spence, maybe. Austin, what do you think? Do you think that it's a crazy idea for the Kings to put Brandt Clarke on the top pairing?
I don't think it's a crazy idea. I would agree that he has the talent and certainly the mentality to do it. I think Jordan Spence is the guy to do it, though. And that's less of an indictment of Brandt Clarke and more of an endorsement of Jordan Spence. I really think Jordan Spence is an excellent, excellent young defenseman. And I think at this point in their careers, I would trust Jordan Spence more at 5v5 than I would trust Brandt Clarke, especially against top-level competition. I just haven't seen enough from Brandt Clarke defensively yet. Haven't seen how well his skating is going to translate, especially, again, against those top-line guys on other teams. I haven't seen enough of him in the corners and in front of the net. Like that. I still have some pretty big question marks about those areas of his game that I don't have with Jordan Spence. So that's where I would look to really elevate Spence to that level. I think where Clarke really should be getting his opportunity and needs to take advantage of it is on the power play. I mean, there's no world where Brandt Clarke should not be quarterbacking the top power play unit in LA. And I, again, because of how highly I think of Brandt Clarke, I think he could be a top 15 quarterback power play right now. I mean, that kid's skill level with the puck, his vision, his ability to find seams and make plays is as good as just about anyone in the league already. He's that talented. So I think that's where you really look for Brandt Clarke to shine and then let a more experienced guy in Jordan Spence take that 5v5 time.
Karo, I know you have a bit of a coaching background. I'll put you in the shoes of Jim Hiller. How are you lining up the Kings' right side on defense?
Yeah, Austin stole all my words and my thoughts. He nailed it, man. Like, Jordan Spence is the guy to me that should get first shot at that. And I love Brandt Clarke. I've been talking about Brandt Clarke for years now. But I would rather he be used on the power play as a priority. Power play one right away. I don't think there's much of a question for me. Like, he's, there's a lot of talk about Victor Arvidsson, the playmaking of Victor Arvidsson missing. And although it would be coming from the top, I think Brandt Clarke can supply a lot of that. And I know we do, but if listeners remember kind of the type of things Sean Dursey was doing on the power play, where he was finding seams from the top and finding guys around the goal mouth, that's the kind of thing I think Brandt Clarke can do. And yeah, I mean, Spence, RD1. See, this part gets tricky because the whole conversation is, well, Edmondson is going to insulate Clarke. They don't want to break that up. I think that's fine. And maybe it's fine that it's Burrows and Gavrikov, because that's more of a straight line to like Matt Roy, right? That's more of a Roy Gavrikov pairing than a Clarke Gavrikov pairing would be. So maybe that's the answer. The key to me, power play. Like, you have to. There's no world where this kid is not on the power play in my mind. He absolutely has to be. So if they do that, I'll deal with I'll deal with the pairing stuff later.
As far as the top three lines go with the forwards to start the season, it appears to be set. The top line with Kopitar centering Kempe and Laferriere. The second line, I think, is going to be Danault, Jeannot, and Moore. And the third line with Byfield centering Fiala and Fogle. Now, I don't know if it's worth debating or not, if it's a big deal or not. I personally would prefer to see Byfield's line be the second line and Danault would be the third line. But do you guys agree? And we'll start with you, Karo. Do you think that top three lines, at least to start the year, is pretty much set? Or is there anyone you would like to see in there in place of any of those guys?
I think to start, that's how they're going to start. I think that's pretty much set. But like, I thought Jeannot, Danault, and Thomas looked pretty good the other day in Anaheim. Again, that's a preseason game against a not great roster. I get all that. But I think when you have utility guys like Laferriere, Jeannot, and Fogle, like, the beauty of those guys, you could put them anywhere. And they're probably going to work anywhere, really, if you think about it, because of the style of game they play. And I mentioned this to you earlier, or the last time I was on, Eddie. What I don't want to see is 2 weeks into the season, Byfield's left wing on the top line. I don't want to see that. That means things are not going well, right? Like, you're pulling the chute on Quinton Byfield as a center because maybe the first line isn't working and the second line isn't working, and you have to go back to this thing that worked for 2 seasons. So that's what I don't want to see. Everything else I'm comfortable with switching around. In fact, I'm curious. Like, Fogle seems like he could work with the top line pretty well. Thomas looks like he could work with the top line pretty well. Do you want to go down to the fourth line? So I suspect there will be switches, but I think to start, that's probably how they'll start, how they have it set right now.
And Austin, I think I saw you put something out on X about, and you mentioned earlier that you're a big fan of Alex Turcotte and how he's looked so far. You would be in favor of him and not Laferriere on the top line. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of the way Alex Turcotte plays the game. I think that he brings a lot of the things that Alex Laferriere does that the Kings like, with a more skilled, with a better puck skill set, right? Like, I think he's better on the puck than Alex Laferriere is and probably will be. I feel a little bad for Alex Laferriere in the way I talk about him, because I feel like I'm constantly dogging that guy, and I do really like Alex Laferriere as a player. I think he's a good, useful player for this organization. I just really don't see him as an LW1 for any team, especially a team that has the kind of ambitions that the Kings do. I think that it's not getting the most out of him and putting him in a spot kind of to fail. And I don't see that being a good combination for this team, especially considering what they lost in Quinton Byfield and his ability to drive play and carry the puck for that line. Alex Laferriere, by no fault of his own, just simply can't do those things, and that is my big concern for that line. And my other big concern is what Karo mentioned. That line really isn't going, and they pull the chute on Quinton Byfield to the middle because they can't get the first line going. And they say, we need to go back to what worked. Let's get him back there and figure everything else later. That is a really big fear of mine, because I have a lot of faith in Andre Kopitar and Adrian Kempe. I don't have a ton of faith in that line as a combination, personally. And I could be completely wrong. Like, I do understand what they like about Alex Laferriere and the potential fit there. I haven't bought into it quite.
And Austin, real quick with the fourth line, where I guess we have some question marks. I guess to start the season, it'll be Turcotte, Thomas, and Lewis. Any of the extra forwards that you've seen that you maybe would like to see on that fourth line role? Guimo, Andre Lee Jack Studnicka, any of those guys done anything for you this preseason that you might like to see them over somebody else in there?
No, I think Fagimo's fringe NHL, or I think he's kind of turning into Martin Frick 2.0. He's going to be a guy that puts up a lot of goals for Ontario.
Yeah.
Studnicka, I think, is probably a guy that can cycle in and kind of be what Jared Anderson Dolan was in his last season for the Kings. He's not going to play a ton, but you can kind of rely on him to play a responsible, hardworking game every night. I'm not convinced Andre Lee is an NHL player currently. And that kind of does put the Kings in a spot where you're playing Turcotte, Thomas, and Lewis as a fourth line. I think that's okay. Turcotte and Thomas are players I really like. Not sure they're great fits on the fourth line. Trevor Lewis is who he is. He's going to give you the game that Trevor Lewis always gives you. So I don't think there's really a battle there. I think it's also pretty set, and it'll be fun. I think people get way too bogged down on what a team's fourth line is going to be. This team's not going to win and lose games off their. They're going to play 8 to 10 minutes a night, maybe 11 or 12 at most. They're going to be fine.
That's kind of why I kind of like Andre Lee, because he's going to get in there and just go in a straight line and hit people and try and make things happen when the forecheck. He's not going to have to do a lot.
Is he going to hit people that much though?
Well, he did. I thought he has done a pretty good job in the preseason. What do you think, Karo? Any thoughts on the fourth line?
As long as it's Thomas and Turcotte and X, I'm fine. I'm with Austin on Andre Lee. He might get there. Maybe he will get there actually, because he's raw and he's shown a lot. I just feel like the puck skills aren't there yet, which I know I'm talking about a fourth liner, and I know that's maybe not a fair comment, but I'll just say let him marinate a little bit more. I'll leave it at that. I think my hope was that Kaliev would maybe be in there a little bit, but obviously that's now completely up in the air. Studnicka, I think, is fine, as kind of a pinch hitter if you need him in a game. If it's a different look against a different opponent, I think you put him in. But overall, I expect Trevor Lewis to play. I don't have a huge problem with Trevor Lewis. I think he's fine for the fourth line, and I think we're not in the locker room. I really do think the Turcottes and Thomases of the world benefit from being around Trevor Lewis and playing with Trevor Lewis a little bit. So Father Time's undefeated. He's not going to be here forever. This is probably his last season. He's going to play his 1,000th game. So it's fine. I'm good with it. As long as, again, Thomas, Turcotte need to get those minutes.
All right, up next, we talk about where we think the Kings are going to end up at the end of the season. That's next here on Locked On LA Kings, your team every day. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season off with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. When you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. That's pretty cool. And we love betting on the NFL. We got the Rams. They are 3-point favorites against the Packers this weekend. Chargers are favored against Denver, giving up to 2.5 points. You've also got postseason baseball going in full swing. Dodgers are plus 350 to win it all. And you got college football. Austin's USC Trojans are 8.5-point favorites against Minnesota this weekend. And, of course, hockey is coming soon as well. Join FanDuel, browse the latest betting odds for your favorite sports and teams on the Sportsbook app, and get in on the action. You can also get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. All right, we are wrapping it up with Austin Stanovich of the Hockey News, Karo Blikian of the Bannerman Podcast and Hockey News contributor as well. And guys, I guess we'll start off by saying maybe a couple of keys for the LA Kings for them to kind of end up where they want to be at the end of the year. Karo, anything in particular kind of from a broad standpoint about keys for the Kings this coming season?
Well, offense, obviously, I think is the one that's going to jump out to everyone. You look at this lineup, I think the glaring question, the big question is, will there be enough goals coming from this lineup? And that includes the power play, which was, not great last season in general. So those two things, I think, need to click. I think the Kings were really good off the rush last year. If you look at the stats, like scoring-wise, they were a good rush team. And that's coming out of the 1-3-1 most of the time, which that's tough to do. Like, that's a long way to skate. With the 1-2-2, they're a little more aggressive now. Like they're up all the way up on the red line trying to force turnovers. That's going to give them more rush chances. So I'm hoping that's going to translate to more offense. I think the defense is going to be fine. Even with Doughty out, I really do believe in Jordan Spence. If they can eat those minutes, I think they'll be okay. Goaltending, I think, is going to be fine. So, yeah, in a grand scheme of things, is can you get enough offense to play in this Pacific Division with the high-powered Edmontons, Vancouvers? They're going to be scoring a lot. So there's going to be nights you're going to have to trade some goals with those teams. So that's the big thing. If I were to look at it, that's the big thing for me.
Austin, maybe a key or two from you about the Kings this season?
I think the big key for me is progression from the young guys without regression from the veteran players. I remember last summer talking to Tom McClellan about how important, the Quentin Byfields and at that time the Jordan Spences of the team kind of making a big progression was. And he said, absolutely, we need that. But that doesn't matter if it comes at the same time as a regression from the Kopitars, from the Denos, whoever it is. And I think that's a big key for this Kings team. They really need those young guys to step up, absolutely, but it can't coincide with a step back from some of the more veteran guys. And, Andrei Kopitar has been as consistent as any player in the last almost 20 years. He is 37, though, right? I mean, Trevor Moore was fantastic last year. If he only scores 16 or 17 goals instead of 30, how do you make up that? Like, that's my big thing, is there needs to be progression without regression for this team to really find success.
I think the Kings are going to make the playoffs for a fourth straight year. Now, that also could be a bit of indictment about the bottom four teams in each of the other divisions. But Austin, what do you think? Are we going to see Kings playoff hockey for a fourth straight season?
Yeah, I do. I have certainly my question marks about this team. I don't think it's an amazing team on paper, but my big thing is until someone else takes it from them, I think that's their spot to lose. And I think they're good enough to hold on in the Pacific Division to that playoff spot.
Yeah, I think good enough is kind of a key way to put it. Karo, would you agree with that?
I do. I think when you look at the Pacific, it's Edmonton and everyone else. And if I'm being completely honest, Vancouver had a great season, but they're up against it with a Demko injury. Like they seem like they're in flux right now and how they're going to be. So let's say I'm saying Vancouver is a lock for the second spot, hypothetically. I don't believe in Las Vegas. Like, I really don't. Like, I look at that roster and I'm like, you bled champions for the last two seasons. And you look at their top two lines, it's so much hinges on Stone and Eichel to me. And they haven't played a healthy season in I don't know how long. Right. Mm-hmm. So if they're going to miss 15-20, like that's a tough stretch for that team, in my opinion. Their defense is still great, but to me, I really felt this way before Doughty got hurt. I really felt the Kings were better than the Golden Knights on paper. Now with Doughty out, it's a little more sticky, obviously, but I think the Kings not only can make the playoffs, I think they could be third in the division. Because I really think Vegas at some point is going to hit a wall. They hit a big wall they started on fire last season and they hit a wall. To me, that's the real Vegas Golden Knights, in my opinion, from what I saw. So maybe it's more about them than it is the Kings, but yes, I expect the Kings to be in the playoffs.
Yeah, I agree with you about Vegas as well. Now, the Kings have not won a playoff series since winning the Stanley Cup in 2014. I don't think they're going to match up against the Oilers this time around, so that should help. Do we see them finally getting I know the good matchups, obviously. We don't know what it's going to be. Are you more optimistic because of the Edmonton situation, maybe, that the Kings can win a playoff series this year? Or is it just too hard to tell at this point because you don't know what the matchup could be? Carl, I'll start with you.
Yeah, for some reason, I just, in my mind, they're going to be wild card and they're going to face Edmonton anyway. That's just, obviously, I just said they might be better than Vegas. But look, man, it's so hard. Like, if we were just to, play predictions and just say, okay, Vancouver's second, Kings are third. That's a hard series with Demko and Ned because he'll be back by then. And the Canucks are very explosive offensively. Certainly, if you gave me the choice, I'd take my chances. I just think, unfortunately, the ceiling for the Kings is winning in the first round. So
go ahead.
Maybe they do it, and maybe they get out of the first round against the Vancouver or whoever it is. But I think after that, you're staring down a really good team in the second round, and that's where I think my faith tips.
For sure. And I think we're all looking, frankly, at Progress being a first round playoff victory.
Yes.
If it goes farther than that, I think we would all be pretty stunned. We can always hope. But you're shaking your head in agreement a lot here, Austin. You agree that would you say the chances are a little bit better this year than the past couple of years, or still way too early to tell?
Yeah, I'm kind of torn between two minds on this team for a first round playoff win, because I do think there's clearly a focus this summer in making this more of a, quote unquote playoff team, whatever that means. Getting uncomfortable, they're more physical, they're bigger, they can score more and around the net, all those things that we associate with playoff hockey. And I think they've definitely done that. I think they've made some good moves this summer. But I look at that roster and I have a hard time confidently saying they're a better team than they've been the last few seasons, even if they are different. And the glaring issue that I've had with this team for 3 years in a row, that in my opinion has been the biggest reason they've lost in the first round 3 years in a row, they do not have elite talent in premium positions. Center, D, and goalie, they do not have any true elite talent. Like, as much as I love Andre Kopitar and Drew Doughty, they're first ballot Hall of Famers, they're two of the greatest Kings of all time, they aren't the players anymore that can carry you through a playoff series that you need. Darcy Kemper, I don't envision being that, elite goalie. I know we say that, you don't need that to win the playoffs anymore, but you do if you don't have elite players in those other two positions. And that's my big concern with this team still. I think there's a chance Quentin Byfield is that by the time we get to game 83, again, because I'm just a big fan of his game. But unless something like that happens where Quentin Byfield takes a massive step and you're looking at him as a legitimate star center in this league, I just have such a hard time seeing them beat some of the kind of more powerhouse teams in this Western Conference. Again, if you're matching up with even a Vancouver and JT Miller, Quinn Hughes, Thatcher Demko, Elias Pettersson, if it's, obviously we know about Edmonton, if it's Dallas with the horses they have over there, like, it's really hard for me to say this team can win a playoff round without those pieces I'm talking about.
He is Austin Stanovich of the Hockey News. You can follow him on X, Twitter at @Stanovich68. And we have Karo Blikian from the Bannerman Podcast, Hockey News contributor as well. He is at KGB Lix, LIX. Guys, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. Always enjoy checking in with you and getting your thoughts on the Kings. We'll definitely do that, hopefully throughout the regular season coming up. But great to get your thoughts, and looking forward to another season of Kings hockey. Thank you guys so much.
Thanks, Eddie.
Yeah, thanks,
Appreciate
Eddie.
it.
All right. Hope you guys enjoyed that as well. For you everydayers, those of you that listen to watch Locked On LA Kings every day, coming up on tomorrow's show, we'll preview that Bruins Kings preseason game in Quebec, second to last preseason game of the year. Friday, we'll have our fan feedback show as usual. If you want to send an email for that, lockedoneddie@gmail.com. And you're also welcome to post your comments on the YouTube channel as well. Stay connected with the show on social media, X, Twitter, and Instagram. We are at Locked On LA Kings. I'm Eddie Garcia. Thank you so much for listening and watching this episode of Locked On LA Kings, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Have a great rest of your day. We'll talk to you tomorrow. And as always, go Kings, go.